Welcome to Darklaw Dominion, where we dive deep into the shadows, the darkest parts of ourselves that we rarely speak of, yet we all feel. I'm your host, Dominion, and in this series, we're not afraid to face the raw truths of our mental health, the battles that rage within, and the weight we carry when no one else is watching. This is where we confront the fears, the pain, the trauma we hide, and uncover the power that lies within the darkness. Because only by facing it can we truly heal and rise. Let's take this journey together. Welcome to the depths of Darklaw Dominion.
Good afternoon, and welcome to the Creative Dominion podcast with your host, Dominion, and welcome to the second half of the Darklaw Dominion Mental Health Series, Season 2. We're joined here in episode 9 of this wonderful mental health series by Mr. Schiemer out of the wonderful state of Oregon. And so I'm just honored and privileged to have Jared here as a guest on this wonderful platform to really dive deep into a topic that will soon be disclosed that I feel really impacts every member of today's society, regardless of background. So with that being said, how are you today, Jared?
I'm doing fantastic. Super excited to be here and dive into today with you, and it's going to be fantastic.
Awesome. And so with that being said, can you tell the audience a little bit about who you are?
Absolutely. So my name is Jared Schiemer, and I'm the founder of Revelation Life Coaching, the business that I coach under and have for the last 3 years. And so my journey as a coach started when I was 18. I saw a video of Tony Robbins at a conference and what he shared and the information and the wisdom that he was able to pour out onto me throughout the video. And then further down the line, I went to some of his conferences and I went through his training program and I went through just a lot of the offerings that he has and felt very molded by Tony and shaped with him. The other person that I really draw off of is Dr. Brene Brown, and she does some incredible research and a lot of literature on shame, vulnerability, and courage. And so my journey as a life coach started, like I said, when I was 18, and I just knew that there was more of me to tap into. And I felt like this part of me that was just wanted to express myself more, be connected to others more. And so one of the things that I ran into is this experience or this emotion of shame. And this is such an incredible destructive human emotion that we all experience in very different parts of our lives and in very different facets. And sometimes we don't even realize that this is what's happening underneath us. So that is one of the things. I'm a connection coach, and the antidote to the lack of connection or sometimes shame that we experience is connection. And so I help people dive more into their self-worth. And really the most important thing to understand about self-worth is that you can't be granted that by anyone else. It has to come from within you.
Awesome. Again, I just love that. And really just as we get started, I really just want to encourage the audience to really take one thing that resonates with them and really apply it immediately to their daily life. And then on the caveat to that as well is really just, always say reach one, teach one, and really share that knowledge with, a peer, a coworker, a family member, and allow us to, as a whole nation of individuals all around the world, to really, raise each other up in that knowledge of really educating on mental health. And specifically, the title was Shame. And so, really excited to cover this topic because I feel like shame is one of those things, like Jared alluded to, is that we all feel, but it's not a word that is commonly used. And as we begin today and dive deep into this wonderful raw emotion that all humans feel, I really want the audience to really think, just ask yourself this one question as we speak through this episode. When's the last time that you felt shameful? Really think about that question. And then the follow-up question to that is, when the last time that you vocalized that? And so as we speak and as we dive deep into this raw emotion through this episode, you come to realize, not a lot of times do we communicate with each other and really use the word shame. I'm in very, very rare circumstances, but yet it's such a common emotion amongst us all. When's the last time someone asked you, "Hey, how are you doing today?" "Oh, I'm feeling shameful." Nobody's ever really, said that, whether it's at school or at work or even, at the grocery store or the restaurant. Nobody really vocalizes that, but yeah, that's one of the emotions that we all feel. And so join us as we dive into this episode 9 inside the Darklaw Dominion Mental Health series. And so I always say, reveal the true light that shines as we journey through the darkness inside. So, um, like I said, buckle up. It's going to be a wonderful ride. And we're going to roll right into shame. And so, the first question I have for you, Jared, as we're getting into the shame topic, what inspired you the most to really tackle that, that line of work with the word shame and with that emotion of shame? Because, like, we've spoken so far, it's such a unique word, but it's such a common emotion.
Oh my gosh, absolutely. Shame is just such an icky word. You have this like visceral sense sometimes when you hear it, this just like trying to run from even the word and obviously the associated experience. And oftentimes in my life, I've held on to the quote, your mess becomes your message. Your mess becomes your message. And I always feel like a pretty shameful person, and I just want to dive right into the definition of shame so that we can kind of get a clear understanding of what it is when what we're talking about with shame. What is that? What is the experience of that? So we've identified that it's a destructive human emotion, but shame comes to us when we feel like we're not enough. And it's typically preceding, or excuse me, it's preceded by a traumatic event or a traumatic experience. And it doesn't have to be a big T trauma. It can definitely be, a little T trauma with a relationship or an embarrassment or some kind of thing that is highlighted in your personal experience. And so shame comes to us as a vehicle of isolation of I'm no longer good enough to be with the pack and I have to do something, be something, not do something, or say something in order to be this person or not be this type of person.
Awesome, awesome. I love that you broke that definition down. And as you were going through that definition, I really kind of thought to myself, and again, as you're listening and viewing, I want you to be able to kind of look at the mirror and think to yourself, it's going to sound funny, but like was alluding to earlier, it's kind of shameful to even say the word shameful. Like you feel shame vocalizing that you feel shameful. And I just love that. Like I said, it's going to be a powerful episode just off that alone because, as you were speaking, I'm like, really thinking, just on the traumatic experiences and, we've all gone through different traumatic experiences, and we always, we see the big ones like on the news, like whether it's domestic violence or, crime committed, whether it be sexual assault or murder, or we kind of, if it's a big breakup and there's stuff thrown and, a bad divorce, but it's kind of look at also some of the smaller, minuscule day to day shameful experiences. I kind of want to conversate through that and break those down first before we get into the big ones because those I love that you said your mess becomes your message. And when you're looking at a mess, when you're washing dishes and you spill a little bit of water on the counter, you just take a little paper towel or a napkin, clean it up, and you throw it in the trash and it's clean. That's what we call a small mess. So what happens when the faucet breaks and the water is leaking everywhere? Now the kitchen's flooded. Now you have, a bigger mess or a bigger message. And so um, what we have to look at, what I want to look at, at the start is really some of those minuscule shameful moments that kind of happen at the beginning. And I'll just name one. And like I said, I'll kick it over to you to kind of go through some of your examples. But one that I can think of, I'll just, be embarrassed. So, I just remember, it's going to sound weird, but I remember like being in elementary school, like kindergarten, first grade.
Yeah.
And it was, in the winter time, it was snow and ice on the ground. And, I was trying to walk, or run home because I lived, kind of around the corner and would walk home. And I just remember, all my friends, walking, we're all walking through the school parking lot together. And I just remember being the only one that like slides, and I, take one step forward and I slide and fall back first in front of everybody on the ice, and
Mm,
everybody's laughing. And, at this time I'm, very, young of age. And the reason why I use that example is because that was what we call a shameful moment.
yeah.
And it sounds very minuscule, but as we'll allude to throughout the episode, if you're not equipped with the tools to really counteract shame, those small moments, they end up getting forgotten when they become into those bigger messes. And so I'll let you kind of allude to that and kind of give some examples as well.
Yeah, no, absolutely. That was such an incredible example. Thank you for sharing in your own personal experience, because what you did in that moment is that you made a meaning of that, the emotion that you experienced in the moment of falling backwards and getting embarrassed and laughed at in front of your peers. You now had this meaning of, fill in the blank, but it would be something along the lines of, I have to be, I have to be the most careful when I walk. And so that's what shame does. It over exemplifies something in order to protect us from something that we don't need to be protected of anymore. And it was this moment, right, that you had that was a single experience. And our brain does a number of things. We generalize, we delete, we distort. We have so much information that comes into us. And in order to be able to manage all the things that we have in our brain, we have to delete and distort certain things in order to categorize things so that we can keep on living and so that we don't explode in our brains. So absolutely. So those moments of embarrassment are so crucial to identify, because some of those parts of us, right? There's different parts. If you think of the movie, the Disney movie Inside Out, there's all these little emotions, all these little parts. There's parts inside of us as well. And some of those parts have held on to these moments thinking that they are still reality. And that's something that is really deeply intertwined with trauma, because when trauma goes into the brain, it doesn't get stored with a timestamp. It just thinks it's currently happening on a consistent basis. And so, we're diving into this experience of feeling embarrassed in that moment. And it's like, wow, like being able to connect with yourself in an intentional way and help that part of you understand that that was just a moment. And now we can laugh at it. Everybody's had those moments. Being able to be compassionate to yourself, that's a huge, huge, like almost required for shame, to have that self compassion and be able to dive into that. But we see shame permeate a whole bunch of other areas in our life too, as well, instead of just in childhood. I can share from my personal experience. I was very driven to go get what I could out of the corporate world. And I would try and climb the ladder as fast and as best I can and claw. And I was never did anything to, create a disadvantage for anyone else. But there was always this overwhelming desire for me to be significant in the workplace and to be, whether I was just trying to get a promotion, whether I was, the youngest supervisor, the youngest manager in my area, in my field, whatever it was, like it was just me having to be driven to achieve more and to have kind of, perfectionism is another thing with shame. But the thing that's important to note, that if we don't go back and talk to those moments, like you so beautifully pointed out, then they're going to build and permeate the rest of our lives. And Tony Robbins talks about, if you don't kill the dragon or the monster when it's small, it will become so much bigger and harder to deal with. And oftentimes, like we talked about, or briefly mentioned, sometimes we don't even know it's there. And so we're driven by these like perfectionistic mentalities, or these overachieving mentalities, or these people pleasing mentalities, that's just a byproduct of an experience of shame that we haven't processed fully.
So I love that you broke that down, because it kind of reminded me of another good example of shame that, and it's happened to, I want to say, a 99.99% of everyone. And so the example I'm about to give is, let's say you got a big, party, maybe it's Thanksgiving, family coming over, friends coming over, girls' night out, guys going to come over, watch the Super Bowl party, whatever. Let's say, um, you're trying to get everything together, and let's say It's supposed to be on Saturday night, so it's like, boom, I'm going to get off early Friday. I'm going to
Mm,
deep clean the whole house. Saturday morning, I'm going to get up and freshen up and everything. And let's just say, the game starts at, 6 o'clock at night or whatever. Everybody starts arriving around 4 or 5 o'clock. And let's say you forget to clean your bathroom. You forget to clean the bottom of the toilet. And one of your, you know, aunts or your best friend or even if you have a significant other that you're dating that doesn't live with you, your girlfriend comes over to watch the game and hang out with your other friends and family, and she goes in the bathroom and sees a bunch of, gunk and stuff all over the toilet seat. One of your family members sees it too, and they kind of come out and like calls you out in front of your, all your friends and family. Like, why didn't you
mm,
clean your toilet or why didn't you mop the floor?
yeah.
And so, real quick, I want to like really let the audience understand and really hold that thought for a moment because that is something that has happened, whether it's childhood, whether it's adulthood, whether you're the person owning the house, whether you're maybe it happened when you were a kid and you were supposed to clean your room because your family was coming over and you were, obviously as kids we get lazy and you just kind of throw everything under the bed and your mom went in the room after everybody left and opened under the bed. Now you got in trouble because they're like, what is all this disgusting stuff under your bed? And so, really, I want the audience to really think about that and understand like that's a moment of shame. And another layer of shame with that is that trauma, like Jared was speaking of and alluded to, that sticks with you. And it becomes one of my old mentors used to say, your confirmation bias.
Mm,
As humans, we have a confirmation bias based on the experience that we experience. And so let's say back to my original example of, your girlfriend or family member seeing, all that stuff on the floor. Now, like Jared alluded to with my falling on the ice example, now every time subconsciously, y'all, so I want y'all to really understand with the shame, shamefully, you never want to get made fun of in front of all those people in your house again. So subconsciously, even if you break up with that girlfriend and get a new girlfriend years down the road or whatever, every time someone says, "Can I come to your house or visit?" or "Hey, let's just kick it at your place," you subconsciously are gonna overanalyze cleaning your house because you don't want to fail yourself again.
mm.
And I really want people to really sit on that and really understand the power of shame if you let it, like you said, turn into that big dragon.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, even like, I mean, absolutely, like if you forget to clean the toilet and then you have this experience of embarrassment, but even taking a step back further of like having this drive to clean the house. You know, shame is so focused on making sure our image is buttoned up, looking good, feeling good, and impenetrable. And so what we do is we put on this armor, and maybe that's having a clean house, maybe that's throwing a party in the first place. And that was something that I really dove into myself for, is I always wanted to have people around me, and I was super social, and I just had to have it all. And I started to see that like it wasn't really that I wanted to be social, it's that I felt like I wasn't enough if I didn't have the people to back it up, or if I didn't have the circle to back it up. And so, what we have to identify is looking at the experience of shame and then breaking apart what was the meaning that I gave that experience. Because what's incredible is we can go back and we can change our meaning. Oftentimes, we don't get the entire experience. Like I said, we delete, we distort, and we generalize. Our brain has to do that. We can only realistically, there's typically in any given instance there's over 2 million data points, whether it's light, whether it's depth, whether it's color, whether it's this, that, or the other, and our brain has to interpret all that stuff, and we can only process 132 data points per moment. And so in order for us not to explode, we have to delete, distort, and generalize. And what that does is that it creates a meaning in the moment of what this is and what this means about me.
Well, I love that. I love that acronym that distort, and delete and generalize because again, as we said at the beginning of the episode, really find something that resonates with you. And I want to really everybody to think about that. Everything in life, how many times have, the same thing happened to you and another person? The same exact time, same exact day. Everybody was at the party in high school or college. Everybody went to the party. Yet, if you ask all the different people that went to the party, everybody has a different story. even if
Absolutely.
they all saw the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's so important to like, identify that like what my experience is, just like you were saying, the confirmation bias of I have to have these things fit into the schemas or the boxes inside my brain that I'm already aware of, because our brain is just an efficiency machine. It's just as putting stuff as quickly away into these boxes as we can. And it doesn't, always give us the most complete picture. And so when we're working with coaches or healers or therapists, being able to utilize those type of people to be able to help you reframe certain instances or look even deeper into, yes, like this happened, but maybe here's a couple of the other reasons why this mess can become your message.
It's definitely, and it just reminded me because this reminds me of one of a good friend I had before he passed. He used to always say, when we would play football, is he used to always say if somebody said something that said sounds weird or saying, he'd always say, "You don't even believe what you just said." And so as we're going through, just speaking on these examples of shame, that kind of really got me thinking as you were just speaking just now is, a lot of the times, all going back to that confirmation bias, a lot of times you have to not only what we say out loud to others, but what are you telling yourself? And that goes back to what he used to say, when we joke around and play football is what you have to do when you look in the mirror is really ask yourself, do you really believe what you just said? And that goes right back to the shame. Do you really believe that you're not enough? Do you really believe that you have to spend, like the house cleaning example, do you have to spend 4 hours cleaning your house because, 10, 20 years ago, you had a house party and you forgot to clean the toilet? Or do I really have to be careful when I walk that I'm 29 years old and that happened when, 50, 20 plus years ago? And there's some of the things that you really have to think of, as you're really navigating through life. And so far through the episode, like I said, we've kind of gone rapid fire on just some different examples. And I know as the audiences are listening, they're really kind of thinking about, all the different moments and memories of, the parties, when's the last time you got embarrassed at school? Maybe not just falling. Maybe, you were in art class and the paint fell on your head or a bird pooped on your head, while you were walking to class, in the rain, just different, scenarios of shame. And so one of the things I want to continue to speak on with the shame is, and I have a question for you with that, Jared, is, how does one compartmentalize and balance shame? And the reason I ask that is because we are kind of talking, we've kind of spoken on, the far left side of shame, like, hey, being real shameful. But how do you balance, not being too shameful to where you're scared of life, but also not being too careless to where you're just, because the reason I ask that is because we all know those people, or we'll see them social media, like that guy ain't got no chill, he ain't got no shame, or he just out there, he just out there going crazy, like he just don't care, he has no morals, or that guy's crazy. And so to answer that, to ask that
Yeah.
question, how do you like balance the two of as you navigate through life?
Yeah, no, shame. It's such an interesting question. I think, one of the things that I am reminded of in that is that, what do we want to be? Like, how do we want to experience life? Like, we want to feel authentic. I mean, if we look, they did a study in Germany a number of years ago where they actually put human beings in this like vacuum cylinder where they had no outside like radio frequencies or anything that could affect this, and they were able to measure emotions. And so the emotional scale, or when you see like, yeah, that guy's got good vibes, that guy's got bad vibes, people can pick up on that. We're actually an electromagnetic emitter. We have this energy that comes off of us, and it is emotions. And so the quality of the emotions that you have is the quality of your life. And what they found in this study is that love was one of the top emotions that somebody, or as far as frequencies that you can give off, if you're thinking of wavelengths, that's what they studied is the wavelengths and the frequency. So love was one of the ones that were at the top. If you could guess which one was at the very, very bottom, you probably can guess it's shame. Shame, grief, guilt. And I also want to distinguish: guilt is I did bad, and shame is I am bad. And it's making the distinction of telling myself that I am bad. And so being able to look at those differences, and you know what was above love in the study was authenticity. Our authentic self is what we're all trying to get to. And that is completely aligned within who we are. So, in order to balance shame, what you have to actually do is eradicate it, because oftentimes, the people that you're referring to, they don't care. They're just like saying this, they have no morals, or they're actually experiencing shame in a different way, where they feel like they have to overinflate themselves and their ego. Narcissism isn't just horrible people. Narcissists actually are the most pained people in all of humanity. They hate themselves more than they hate anyone else combined, and that's why they're coming off that way. And a lot of people don't understand that, they don't realize that. But looking at how we deal with shame, there's an incredible therapeutic and healing modality called parts work, and it was designed by Dr. Richard Schwartz. And so parts work is basically what I was referring to before, thinking about the inside out. If you remember the Disney movies of all the little, you've got anger, you've got joy, you've got sadness, you've got disgust, those little emotions. They're childlike emotions. And literally inside of us, we have little marked people, like of when we experienced a thing. The ice, maybe if the lonely, like diving into the parts of me, there was a really lonely part. And so being able to dive in and dialogue with that part of us, and it's so helpful to have a coach and a healer, or it's IFS, or internal family systems, if you're working with a therapist. And so looking at the parts of you that are carrying these burdens, these things that you no longer are experiencing and haven't had to experience for years, but you're still living out life that way as if you were. And you're still living life out in the way that, I'm affected by these little or big traumas, or these things that happen to me, or these meanings that I've made of it. And so when we are able to go inside and dialogue with these parts of us, and sometimes that can be journal prompting. Sometimes I've used ChatGPT. I said, hey, ChatGPT, be my IFS therapist, and here's what I'm dealing with. And being able to utilize different things to be able to go in and do the inner work is so important. And to be able to remove shame from your life, because with that shame dissipating, it also removes the triggers, and it removes the just knee-jerk anger that we can feel, because those are the parts of us that are coming up. It's not all of us. It's not our aligned greatest self. It's not the person that God, or your maker or universe made you to be. It's just some part. And so sometimes we're so used to living out of these parts, or out of these shame wounds, or these different things. It's like, this is not who we were made to be. We've just been stuck in living, with a two-wheel tricycle this whole time, or a unicycle doesn't have enough air pumped into it. And so that's why it's hard for us to keep going. And so being able to practically dialogue with a coach, or with someone that knows this type of work, that also helps challenge you, because we can either be a victim or we can be a victor. And we are in complete control of what we want to look at and what we want to focus on in our lives. Yes, bad things happen to us. Should they happen to us? Was it fair? Was it right? Was it just? Absolutely not. Absolutely not. But our mess can become our message. And being able to use those aspects of pain and of suffering, that suffering is only suffering if it doesn't have a meaning, right? If we can use a meaning, and we can have a reason why this happened, or what this could do for me in the future, if I really use use this moment to build myself, that's really what we're after. And so that's kind of a high level overview with some practicals on how we can make shame dissipate. And it's so important to do that, because it will affect your work. It will affect your relationships. It will affect every way that you see yourself. And oftentimes we think of like shame being an external experience. Well, what about the hardest critic that you have that's in your head, right? The one that's beating you up of, you should have done that differently. You should have done this differently. How come you said this? How come you did that? And that's shame going on and on and on repeat, just beating us senselessly in our own minds. And being able to free ourselves and give ourselves that understanding and compassion, and just being able to change and really look consciously at what kind of language are we using. to speak to ourselves, because the language that we speak to ourselves will dictate what we're experiencing in life.
Well, I love everything that you said there, and it really reminded me of really two quotes that it's kind of like ironic that, it's two quotes that, the followers of the Creative Million are very known for me saying. And the first one is, it all ends and begins with you.
Mm,
It all ends and begins with you. I've said that, countless times, throughout the mental health series. And, what that really means is, and one thing I had to learn just through my personal healing journey is, um, you don't have to be Superman or Superwoman, or Wonder Woman, however, whoever, whatever, Marvel, DC, however you want to correlate that. And what that means is, as that shame is eating you up inside, one thing that I had to learn, I always say, was try, fail, adjust. And so that, to your point, could help you, alleviate some of that shame is, that try, fail, adjust. And another one is being, are you committed or are you convicted? I know I did an episode on that, like a short, just with me speaking. And the reason why I love asking that question, and I really want the audience to really hone in on that. Again, I said, are you committed or are you convicted? And so I'll give the quick definitions, summary of the quick definitions real quick. So really commitment is like, hey, I said I was going to do something. And a conviction is I have no choice but to get it done. And so I really want to break that down real quick because it's really two completely different things. And you can really tie it to shame. And I had one of my mentors, my old mentors when I had my marketing business was he would tell me, and I really want this is free, a free tip for all the audience out there. He would tell me, he would say, this is when it comes to goals. He would say, stop lying to yourself. He said, I would rather you set an attainable, short, easy to medium goal and hit it than to set a goal that you know is too far fetched because you're trying to compare yourself to others. Because every time you fail that goal, you're eating yourself alive and your self image decreases far greater than if you just said, I'm going to do what I can do and then hit what I can hit. And I just love when he would say that because, we always say comparison is the thief of joy. And,
yeah.
it's the, comparison is one of the pillars of shame, especially nowadays with this social media age,
Yeah.
I just, just this morning, it's like every one thing I'm just kind of starting to learn. I don't know if people are religious, all the viewers are religious, but I actually completed reading the whole Bible earlier this year, late last month, all 66 books. And well, what I really learned is really that when you really look at the human brain and the aspects of life is everything is being compared to you look on Facebook or Instagram or TikTok, somebody's got the hot wife or the the six-pack ab husband, somebody's got the brand new 6-car garage house, the new iPhones come out every 6 months, the new, hey, there's a new game system, Nintendo Switch 2 just coming out. That's double the price that it was when the first one came out. Your kids gotta have it, a new car, a new watch, a new cologne, new perfume, whatever it is. And, what I've learned is subconsciously, a lot of people living today, and, I really want the audience to listen when I say this, we're subconsciously in a permanent cycle of shame because we are shameful of the fact that if we, to Jared's point earlier, if we don't have the newest iPhone, if I don't finance a new car every 2 to 3 years after my lease is up, if I don't have the brand new Jordan shoes, that I'm less than everybody else in the world because I don't have the brand new hip thing that I see on social media when I scroll every day. And so just wanted to give that quick tidbit for the audience on that. Really just, I love Simon Sinek because, The Infinite Game and Start With Why, two of my favorite books.
Absolutely.
And, again, back to that commitment versus conviction, you really have to look at the outline. Like Jared said earlier, who are you? And, to my point earlier, do you believe what you just said? And you really have to, as you're navigating shame, really have to look at that and see, okay, this is the decision I made. And the reason I said committed versus convicted is if you were convicted on that decision, you're going to say, hey, win or lose, this was my decision. And so what I encourage the audience to do is, let's say that decision turns out not to work for you. Then again, go back to what I said earlier, try, fail, adjust, and move on. And then that alleviates that shame. But if you're just committed to it, if you just say, well, all my friends are going to the gym every day and working out and losing weight, so I'm committed to going on a diet. I'm going to not eat fast food for a month. You're not convicted. You just did it because all your friends are, losing pounds and gaining muscle, and you're just sitting you're still sitting on the couch eating McDonald's every day, gaining weight. And again, like we've been saying all episode, that shame of, hey, I got to keep up with all my friends. All my friends are fit. They're, fly. They're going to the gym. They're strong. They're got a six pack. She, look at her, look at that lady's, legs. She got those calf muscles just popping in those leggings. And, I'm, my stomach's rolling over. I can't even fit my clothes. I got to get it together. You're going to continue to be in that permanent cycle in that permanent labyrinth and maze of shame. And, this is some of the things, like I mentioned at the very beginning of the episode, those small, small, small messes, like Jared said, become that big message. And, with mental health, we've seen that big message end lives. We've seen it unalive people. We've seen it, create people that are very, very small shells of themselves. And, it is something that, again, this is why we love, having these podcast episodes and really shedding light to these topics, because, it is something that really needs to be looked at and really, like Jared said, eradicated when it comes to shame.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, that's so many good points there. And I think that, I love the being able to look at failure as a corrective, like, being able to adjust from failure. Failure isn't failure, it's feedback, right? Where it's just being able to adjust. And so one of the things that I always use is storytelling. And I think oftentimes that we can take away a lot more from looking at something else and then relating it to our lives. And so for your religious or believers and that listen to your podcast, we've had shame from the very beginning. And the story goes like this. There was a couple living in a garden, and this is all about an apple or whatever it is, right? So what happens in Genesis? What happens in the Garden of Eden is the man and the wife, they're dialoguing with the serpent, the one that does us evil, the liar, the accuser. So what are they doing? They're going back and forth, and they, God says this is the only tree in the middle of the garden that you should not eat from, the tree of knowledge of good and evil. And looking at what happens there is we ate the fruit and we had to hide. We sewed fig leaves and we hid ourselves. And God comes and he says, where are you? Where are you? He's reaching out for us. The universe is reaching out for us. If you're not a believer, we are being reached out to all the time. And it's us that hides ourselves because we don't feel like we're enough. Whether we don't have the shoes, we don't have the phone, we don't have the car, we don't have the girlfriend, we don't have the money, whatever it is that we don't have, or that we do have that make us unlovable, whether it's a sexual trauma, whether it's whatever experience that makes us feel like we're not enough. Those are lies. And being able to let those go because they're no longer serving your highest and best self. And yes, they made you who you are today. And they've given you all kinds of scars and wounds and things like that. But your scars and wounds are valuable. And being able to see, from the very beginning, we've had to deal with shame. Looking at Genesis, looking at how we responded when we made a wrong decision, what meaning we took from it. We ate that apple and we had to hide. We were ashamed of ourselves. We had to put clothes on. We made clothes and we hid in the garden. God says, where are you? And the healing aspect, the thing that heals shame is relationship, it's connection. And when we can connect to someone else, or when we can be listened to and be in a place where we're experienced vulnerably and loved, that's the most transformative thing that a human can experience.
I love the way you broke that story down because, it just reminds me of, an older episode from the first season is really just, surround yourself with safe people.
Mm,
And like my analogy earlier with the gym analogy, well, those safe people that go to the gym, do they encourage you to go to the gym? Do they encourage you, or are they just saying, hey, you're fat, and laugh at you and just say, yeah, you need to get in the gym, you're getting fat. And, those are the kind of things that, again, that exponentially intensify the feeling of shame is the people that you have around you. And, it could be said for, many different topics and like situations. And one thing that we kind of haven't dived in deep into that we're kind of going to right now is really the how it affects those relationships.
yeah.
And, I know, for those of you that follow the podcast, I know we have um the Black Garden relationship series. But again, the great thing about life and, having a mental health, um, you know, topics and, podcasts is that mental health goes right to relationships and relationships go right to mental health. And the reason for that, for those of you that are wondering or kind of newer, is that life is a big relationship. Like he just broke down the book of Genesis, the whole cycle of human life is literally picking a side of who you want to relate to, whether it's good and evil, God or the enemy. You literally have God gave us the free will for those of you again that are religious, or if you're not religious, you were given the free will, the freedom of choice. Just like he said, Adam and Eve, they were given God didn't say, I'm going to not give you a mouth to eat. He said, hey, just don't eat that fruit. But he gave them the free will to choose to eat the fruit. And that is, the reality of human life is you get to choose, who you want to relate to and how you were to relate, because regardless of who you are, every human has to relate to something or somebody. And so we're kind of going to real quick break down, I want to ask Jared, what does shame look, how does shame make a relationship kind of deteriorate? And, if there's, for the couples that are listening, how can we eradicate shame as we're dating?
Such a good question. Relationships are so near and dear to my heart. I work with a lot of couples that are in that marriage or they're in that relationship or they're in that committed vehicle of showing and expressing love. And there's so many aspects of all that. I'm sure we could do an entire podcast just about, everything there. But when it comes to shame, when we're looking at shame in relationships, what happens is that when we are triggered by something, there's some kind of shame or there's some wound in us, and somebody will say something, and it will immediately go into the box that we have in our brain of we're hurt, of that means this. We generalize, we delete, we distort. And so watching how shame directs our communication, or rather our retrieval of information, when we receive information from somebody else, whether we're talking or having an argument, because conflict in a relationship is actually good. It's just how you go about doing that that can either exponentially grow your relationship, make you so much stronger, or it can make it deteriorate. And it is usually, that this conflict or this communication between people that is the thing that deteriorates. And then ultimately, what people get to at the end is that, well, we just weren't compatible. And I'm sorry, I don't believe that. I think that there's a lot of things that are playing into that. And the umbrella statement is that we're just not compatible. And so when we look at shame in relationships, one of the things that we can identify or notice is that when we lose passion in a relationship, when we don't feel as energized, we don't feel as much like love for the other person, we've gotten to a place of a lack of polarity. And so we have this masculine energy and this feminine energy on opposite sides of the spectrum that create this magnetic attraction instantly. When you see a girl at a bar, or you're picking up somebody to dance, or you're at a party, or whatever interaction, maybe you're at church, maybe you're doing this, maybe you're at the grocery store and you're seeing somebody, and there's just this magnetic attraction between you guys. That's polarity right there. And so when we lose our natural spot of polarity, so in a relationship, in a good relationship, there is someone who owns masculine energy, and there's someone who owns feminine energy, and that's not necessarily tied to your gender. And so, as far as like just the general experience, I mean, my wife and I, I'm typically more the masculine person, and she has, or I have that masculine energy and the feminine energy. What has to happen is that we have to maintain that polarity, and things that will make me go and lose that polarity, make me go from masculine energy into feminine energy. And that what that might look like as a behavior is becoming more people pleasing, becoming more shut down, becoming into this place of, I can't do anything right, or like feeling like I am experiencing, this shame in my head or in my, in my behaviors, and then watching that play out in my relationship. And so it's the cycle of things that I'm telling myself. And this, this has definitely been, something, as far as, showing vulnerability here, like me getting stuck in my head of, if I'm not the provider, if I'm not doing these things that are, make me this masculine person. And sometimes it's fake masculinity. There's toxic masculinity, there's toxic femininity, and it's about behaviors that stem from shame. So a lot going on in each of those. But as far as someone who's losing that connection with their spouse from that level, it's typically coming from a place of shame where they've started to believe something that maybe isn't true. For my, as far as just sharing from my experience, maybe I'm believing something that, like, if I'm not the provider, then I won't be loved. And if I'm not loved, I'm not good. If I'm not good enough, then I won't be loved in that way. And that's kind of what we run into with shame, is that we kind of walk through that progression of, we believe this lie or this thing or this narrative that we're telling ourselves, this story. And then when we move into that place, we start to believe that if we don't do this, then we won't be loved. And if we aren't loved, then we'll be alone. So
I love the way you broke that down, and like we said, we could have a whole episode on just relationships and shame. But what I want to leave the audience with on the relationship point is, first I'll say is, really think about your own relationship. Or if you're single right now, listening, think about your past relationships. It's always, even if it's infidelity, who's that shame? Like, we went to the grocery store, that guy was smiling at her, that girl was smiling at him. Why the waitress smile at you and call you honey bun when she, gave you your plate, that you're my man, that's weird. Why that guy look at your butt when you walked in front of me? That's weird. You're my girlfriend. Again, that's that shame and that confirmation bias. And again, like Jared said, those lies you tell yourself, like, well, maybe she's, seeing someone else, or maybe, that shame of being afraid of losing that person, or,
yeah,
what if that guy had had a six pack ab and, had a, $1 million salary, what if she's, what if I'm not good enough? What if she's going to leave me? Or what if he's going to leave me? And then, even like we were saying on the provider front, what if, I can't pay, what if I can't cover my rent for the month because I'm sick, or maybe I get laid off, or, maybe the, volume at work is slow, so they send us home. Or what if they raise the rent or raise our mortgage and, I can't keep up? Or, what does she think of me? What if I'm not good enough to, be the husband, be the head of household? Or, same thing from the other side, from the woman's side, what if I'm not nurturing enough to be, his wife? Or what if he doesn't love me when I get wrinkles, or when I get, gain more weight? Or, you know, um, try to cut my hair because I thought he'd like it and he didn't like it. Or I dyed my hair because, and, kind of getting to what Jared said with that people pleasing. And so really, I just want to say, who made these standards? And when I say that is, we always see that 50-50 question going around. And the question you really have to ask yourself is, what fits your relationship? Again, like we said at the very set, over 50 minutes ago, do you believe what you said? Is that fitting your priority? Is that for your relationship? My mom used to always say, everything that look good ain't good for you, and everything that glitter ain't gold. So you really have to look at that when you navigate life, especially in relationships. It's just, everything isn't meant, for, your relationship. And so really just want to encourage the couples out there, just on focusing on your own shame and your own mental health is really I encourage, communication and early communication, really talking about those things. Because like I said at the very beginning, my first example, one of your shameful triggers that triggers you in the relationship could be you falling on the ice when you were a kid and you never talked about it. You just held it in and it became a big mess and the faucet broke and you've been dating all these dudes or you've been dating all these women and you've just been skating by life and here now, here it is again coming up in conversation or in a problem that needs solved in your relationship. And here you are again, trying to, you done ate the forbidden fruit. Now you're hiding,
Yeah.
from that shame. And so just encouraging all the couples out there, really, communicate, seek higher counsel, go to counseling, talk through it, work through it, try, fail, adjust. And one last thing I'll say, and I'll let Jared, I got another question for Jared, and we'll kind of, wind down. And I heard this in a sermon, several months back, and the preacher was preaching. He said, you can't accept the role. Again, you can't accept the role and reject the responsibility. You can't accept the role and reject the responsibility. And so I know Jared was talking about moving up the corporate ladder earlier. We're talking about getting married, relationships. We're talking about, eradicating shame. Just remember as you're, navigating through life, you can't accept the role and reject the responsibility. And so with that being said, one of the last questions for you, Jared, is what is your biggest success stories with one of the clients that you've coached?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's so many that I, could look back on in just moments. I really appreciate like just when I get into a client situation, I love getting to know somebody in an intimate way and being able to be that mirror for people to tell them, sometimes all it takes is that's not who you are. In a loving way, that's not who you are. Because we believe these lies and we get circled into those kinds of things. I've worked with religious pastors or youth pastors, a youth pastor myself, a volunteer at a church. I've worked with military pilots and tech sales folks, and I've worked with relationships that are crumbling. I've worked with a lot of different people, and I think I guess I don't have a specific client that I would want to highlight, but the instance that I can see among all those clients that I've worked with is when they finally get to a place that they are shedding their insecurities and coming to this place of authentic freedom, which is what I always try and deliver for my clients. And it takes a lot of time and it takes a lot of intentional effort. And just diving back into, you said a couple of things. And I think the equation to bring everything home is this: if there's shame, you need connection. And in order to get connection, there has to be vulnerability. So being able to be vulnerable leads to connection and eradicates shame. And that's kind of the inside out, upside down approach that we have to take in order to rid ourselves of these insecurities. And it's possible. I've seen it done in a lot of instances. I've worked with a lot of people that have been able to remove shame from their life in ways that it was holding them back. And jobs, they've changed jobs since, working with that. Sometimes when you lift the hood up and you go through and you do all that work, you realize like you're not in the right place, and you're not in the right space, and you have to take a different course because you were doing this from a place of lack. You were doing this from a place of shame, and you didn't realize it because it was so ingrained in you. And the thoughts that were running through your head, the anxieties and the things that you were dealing with on a regular basis, like that's just that's the human experience. Can we eradicate shame indefinitely? No, we cannot, unfortunately, until we're 6 feet deep in the dirt. Not a reality for human beings. But what we can do is we can get as far as working with clients, I'm able to show them tools that they can use to keep their lives so much more fulfilling and so much more actualized and so much more fulfilled and connected to who they really are as people. And it is a set of principles, it's a set of practices, and it's consistent work. And that's what I love about working with my particular clients.
Awesome, awesome. Again, love everything you shared today. It's been a wonderful, impactful episode 9 for Darklaw Dominion Mental Health Series Season 2 with Jared Schiemer. out of Schiemer, out of Oregon. And so, with that being said, Jared, as we close, any last minute advice for the audience, as well as telling the audience where they can find you?
Yeah, I just want to speak to your listeners directly and saying that you are not the sum of what you can produce. It's taken me years to learn that. You are not the sum of what you produce. You're not the sum of how beautiful you are. You're not the sum of what you've accomplished. You're not the sum of any of that. You are good and you are whole indefinitely before any of those accomplishments, any of those insecurities, and well after. You are everything that you have inside of you is what's required to make it to the next level, and that's the thing that I love sharing with my clients and with you. And if you want to connect in the future, for those of your listeners, if they want to learn more about shame or the approach that I take, revelationlifecoaching.com is my website. I've got a couple of ebooks that are on there that are really helpful in order to bring people, through certain experiences and being able to look at those aspects of themselves, whether it's goal setting or one of the titles is Kicking Loneliness, and that deals with a lot of those shame aspects. The other thing is that I'm on Instagram as the personal development DJ. DJing is a big part of my life and a big aspect. And I do a lot of speaking and DJing for organizations that, want that. And so it's been phenomenal to just dive into this incredibly dense topic. We could have used probably another 3 hours to cover, everything, but it's been fantastic. And to me now, I just appreciate being able to learn from your wisdom, and thank you for being a guide for these people that are diving into mental health, because it's one of the most important aspects of someone right now.
Awesome, awesome. And, again, definitely appreciate, having you on, Jared. And, as we close out, I'll leave the audience with this. Again, like we said, are you committed versus convicted? From Jared, your mess can become your message. He's gonna copyright that one. That's a good one. Yeah, that'll be one of his books or something one soon.
It's from Dean Graziosi. I can't take credit for that. He's such a fantastic leader, but Dean is responsible for saying that.
Awesome, awesome. Yep. So again, use that quote. Again, your mess can become your message. And as I always say, it all ends and begins with you. And so as you dive into this episode 9, again, welcome back to the second half of the second season of our wonderful Darklaw Dominion mental health series. It's been a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful episode on shame with Mr. Jared out of Oregon. And, you guys feel free to, check out his website, check out those ebooks, and, message him on Instagram, or feel free to reach out via website on feedback. I'd love to, I'm sure he wouldn't mind, you picking his brain on some of the different topics regarding shame. And so with that being said, until next time on Darklaw Dominion, this has been Dominion and Jared out of Oregon, and we'll see you on the other side. Thank you.
Thank you for joining me on this journey into the depths of Darklaw Dominion. Remember, it's in the darkest parts of ourselves that we often find the greatest strength. Facing that darkness is not a sign of weakness, it's the path to healing, growth, and reclaiming control of your life. If this series resonates with you, or if you're looking for more empowering stories on healing and reclaiming your power, make sure to follow Decree of Dominion on Facebook, Spotify, and YouTube. There, we continue the conversation on mental health, domestic violence, and relationships, offering hope and support. Until next time, keep exploring the shadows, keep seeking your truth, and keep fighting for your light.